until late 2000. And then I went into private practice. I've been a private practice attorney in Sarasota County from 2000 on to this point. My practice is primarily criminal law and matters related to criminal law. So I do handle dependency cases where there is something allegedly criminal related to this case. And in the Kowalski matter, my client was the alleged victim of a criminal act, not as part of a criminal proceeding, but as part of a dependency proceeding, and that fit the definition of my practice.
Very good. Can you tell us how, then, you got involved in this case?
I was contacted by, I believe it was Verinia Van Ness. We were assistant state's attorneys together. We've known each other a long time since, in fact, we started the state attorney's office around the same time. Ms. Van Ness represented Beata Kowalski, my client's mother. I also knew very well Deborah Salisbury, who represented Mr. Jack Kowalski. And there was already an attorney appointed to represent Maya, but they felt that it would be helpful to bring me on as private counsel to Maya.
I have it. And as private counsel to Maya, can you explain to the jury where your, self-explanatory, but your duties and responsibilities with her specifically as private counsel?
Yeah, so that was actually a very big part of my becoming her counsel. I had to make it very clear to everybody involved, including Ms. Van Ness, Ms. Salisbury, and Jack and Beata Kowalski, that my duties were to Maya. I was her attorney. Her legal needs were my focus. Obviously, there was some overlap quite a bit between, in the goals of the various parties, but my loyalties and my duties were specifically to Maya. And everybody understood that that's the way it was going to be. I wouldn't be her attorney unless that was clearly understood.
And for the purposes of these proceedings, we are waiving the attorney-client privilege on behalf of Maya Kowalski so that you may discuss the matter. Now, how did you get to know Maya? Can you tell the jury a little bit about that?
Well, obviously, before I met Maya, I very quickly familiarized myself with the case. The case had already been in existence for a period of time before I came on board. The shelter action had already occurred, and Maya was already, of course, was at All Children's. So the first thing I did was familiarize myself with the case. I did, of course, confer with Ms. Van Ness and Ms. Salisbury. I also did briefly confer with Maya's parents. So I did get background. And then obviously I went to All Children's Hospital to meet my client. I think I spoke with her on the phone once or twice before I met her, and she very, very much wanted to meet me in person. She wanted me out the hospital, so of course I went and saw her.
And then how many times would you say overall you saw her, directly or indirectly?
I specifically recall going to the hospital 2 times. It is conceivably possible that I went a third time, but it's been a long time. I do specifically recall two distinct visits. And then, of course, she eventually was permitted to come to court one day. I think it was January 6th in 2017. And then I met with her that day in court.
So you represented her in court as well?
I did. I correct. I mean, there were many times or several times where I represented her in court and she was not present.
Got it. All right. So tell the jury, if you recall, when you first arrived at the hospital to meet your client, your general impression of the room, her, and the situation.
I first met her outside of her room. She was brought out to meet me in a waiting area. She was in a wheelchair. I remember she was in a dress. And yeah, I met with her in that. That was my first meeting with her. It was in that hallway in the wheelchair.
Well, that sounds like a rather public place. Were you allowed any privacy in that sense?
Not immediately. that was part of an ongoing conversation. Of course, I did have some private conversations with hospital staff, and I did express that I needed to speak with her privately. And there was some, people left the room and conferred, and ultimately I was allowed to go into her room with her, and I was allowed to talk to her with the door open.
And so, attorney-client, can you tell the jury about the importance of the attorney-client privilege and the necessity of privacy, and if I may use the term secrecy, from all outsiders?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're entitled to speak privately. She's my client, despite the fact that she was 10 years old. And I will say she was very mature for her age. Sometimes I've represented children before. They're just not able to express even their own desires. Maya was very clear what she wanted. And one of the things she wanted was to speak to me in private. Found that very interesting. I had been made aware that there was some,
Your Honor,
let's put it mildly,
objection.
Okay, hold on a second, Mr. Zimmerman.
First of all, it's outside the scope of the question. It's way past the question, which was, what's the importance of the privacy? He's starting to talk about what he was made aware of, and I don't know where that's going. And secondly, this conversation is not relevant to the claims in the case.
Well, I'm going to overrule the relevance, but Mr. Zimmerman, I am going to ask you to wait for a question, and let's try to confine ourselves to the actual question asked, if possible.
certainly.
So the attorney-client privilege is very important, and from your statement, privacy is important. Now, I want you to explain to the jury the issues, the problems that arose with you having confidential conversations with your client.
Objection, relevant.
Well, again,
Overruled. You could answer that one.
yeah, I represented her. So my client expressed to me her desire to speak with me privately. I was given the opportunity to speak with her very close to privately. I kept my voice down. So arguably the conversation was private. I was aware that there was someone outside the door who might be trying to listen, but to the degree that it was possible, Maya and I did have a private conversation ultimately in the room.
What was her concern? When you were in private with her, what were her concerns that necessitated, in her view, the need to speak with you alone and be on this topic?
Well, in that meeting, the first meeting, she just wanted, there were certain things she wanted.
Can you give me an explanation, Mr. Anderson? Because it is a hearsay statement.
Well, it's a conversation between attorney and client. She is a minor in this situation. And again, I would ask the court to consider 80323. And also, under these circumstances, this is, although not directly to a medical personnel,
more specific with
803.4, and as well as, although not directly to a doctor, statement for the purposes of then existing medical, psychological, other interests.
803.3.
And I'm going to overrule the objection as to this question. Mr. Zimmerman, you may answer this question.
Right. So I didn't know what she wanted to tell me privately until she told me. And what she told me was that she didn't want to be in the hospital. She told me that she was in a lot of pain, and that she wanted to go home to see her parents. That was her primary focus.
Did she say anything about, at that time, her relationship with the personnel that were taking care of her, for lack of a better term?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Same response.
Overruled.
There was a social worker at the hospital that was assigned to her case, and I had met with that social worker, and Maya expressed a specific. I'm trying to choose between whether it was a dislike or a distrust, or probably both, for that person. I think she blamed that person specifically for keeping her away from her parents.
And so as time went on then, did you observe, and strike that, was that social worker's name Kathy Beatty?
Yeah, Kathy Beatty.
Okay. And so as time went on, can you tell me whether there were, from what you saw and what was expressed by Maya, further concerns with this social worker's behavior towards your client? And that's in lead up to what you did.
Sure. What Maya expressed was that the social worker was keeping her from being able to speak freely to her family, particularly her mother and father. I think she felt that the social worker was keeping her from talking openly and freely with myself.
Did she feel like,
So
did she seem like she was
specifically that was the biggest issue.
Did she seem as though she was in any way fearful, either fearful or uncertain, approaching fearful about consequences when she tried to speak openly to you or her family?
I'm not sure if consequences is the word I would use. I would say that it was more of the nature of she was being prevented. And, to be fair, I would honestly say that the best way to describe how it affected Maya was that she seemed miserable to me. Remember, I'd never met this child before in person, so I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to be presented with. And I'm not easily surprised in my practice, but I didn't know what I was going to encounter at the hospital. But it left me a little bit shaken and very surprised as to why a hospital employee would have such an interest in limiting this child's ability to communicate with her lawyer and family. I really didn't understand what I was encountering. So I was kind of trying to put all the pieces together. And obviously I was getting some information from Maya, but remember, she was 10 years old. But she was very clear in that the hospital personnel, or specifically this one social worker, was limiting her freedom, I guess is the best way I could put it. She felt captive.
And so did there come a time you saw Maya again?
Yeah, I came to the hospital a second time to see her.
Had anything occurred between the first and second time, or were we picking up with the next chance to evaluate Maya?
Yeah, it was the next chance to evaluate her. I sort of waited till I got a sense that the misery level was hitting sort of, a high point. So I know that both of my visits came at a time when I felt that there was a sense of urgency. My client was expressing urgency to see me.
And what were your concerns based on what she was telling you or you were being told about her situation? And I'm directing you more towards her mental health and physical health.
Right. So she was extremely consistent in her expressions about her physical health. She would identify her pain as a 10. So I know that this was a child, she seemed to be, well, because of her condition, she's sort of used to being in pain, but she was expressing to me a lot of pain. As far as her emotional well-being, it was deteriorating, I guess is the best way I could describe it. I have children. I know what a child in distress seems like. So this child was sort of emotionally withering. She loved her family and her parents. She was kept away from them. I mean, if people can imagine what it's like for a 10-year-old child to be kept from her parents by people she doesn't trust, it's not an easy thing to put into words.
Did you find Maya to be mature enough to state to you, from based on your conversations and what you had learned about her, did she appear to be mature enough, even at 10, to adequately express or clearly express what was going on to her?
I remember telling people, like my law partner, who's also my wife, that she almost seemed she had the affect of a much older person, almost a person in her 20s, and her ability to articulate her feelings. So yes, she was very clear to me. I mean, and very redundant. I mean, she was repeating the same things over to me a lot. I mean, I had to tell her that I was in fact hearing her because she kept repeating herself. I wanted to let her know that I was hearing her, but it was a constant statement of, I miss my parents. I want to go home. I'm being prevented from seeing them. I'm in pain. She wanted me to know that she didn't think that what the hospital was doing was helping her, which I thought, I found that surprising, but I shouldn't have, because quite frankly, she'd had this chronic condition, and she'd been getting medical treatment for quite a bit. So she did have a strong sense of what her medical condition was and what her well-being was, what her treatment regimen, her normal treatment regimen was.
So the times that you saw Maya, was Miss Beatty there both times?
That is something I'm having a hard time remembering. I also spoke with Ms. Beatty on the phone multiple times.
And what did she express to you? Let me stop you for just a moment. On any of those phone calls, or if you recall meeting her in person, did Miss Beatty ever acknowledge that the relationship with Maya was not good, or words that?
Yeah. Ms. Beatty was very preoccupied with the rules, or what she perceived to be the rules related to who could have contact with her. She was very, I would say, overly interested in making sure that those rules were strictly enforced. I mean, I was trying to ascertain what her agenda might have been. Perhaps,
Your Honor, object to opinions with respect to somebody's, quote, agenda, end quote, and outside the scope of the question.
Overruled. You can finish, Mr. Zimmerman.
Yeah, I mean, I felt it was my duty as my client's attorney to understand what forces were affecting her. So I did. It was very odd that this social worker, who I thought her interest should be my client's well-being, seemed honestly preoccupied with, who was allowed to see her under what circumstances. I found that very, very odd. I just wanted to see my client.
Was the term micromanage a term you would use with Miss Beatty's interests in who Maya saw and when she saw them and how she saw them?
Yeah, I mean, I would say agenda-driven. I mean, I felt that she was trying to accomplish something, and what it seemed to me that she was trying to accomplish was to keep my client isolated. Now, why that was, I didn't know, but that was clearly her goal, to isolate this child from her family and her lawyer.
Now, how long, if you can give the jury an idea, the time period we're talking about here, from your first introduction to Maya until the end of your representation? Where are we in that late 2016, early 2017 period?
I think I saw her in the first time in early December 2016, and then I think the second time I saw her was maybe 10 days to 2 weeks later. That feels about right to me. It was over the course of about 3 weeks, and then shortly thereafter, seeing her in court. And that was the last time I saw her, I think, until the funeral.
The record reflects there was a court hearing on January 7th of 2017, immediately before Beata Kowalski's death.
Excuse me, I believe, counsel, that it was January 6th, 2017.
Was the hearing? I'm sorry, the 6th was, the 7th was.
Yeah, I thought it was January 6th.
Yeah, I'm apologize. That was that Friday. All right. So the second time you saw her, was this situation getting better or worse in terms of Maya's relationship with this hospital staff, particularly Ms. Beatty?
Oh, worse. That was easy. It was growing from frustration to desperation. That's the best way I could phrase it. I mean, remember, you have to remember, this is a 10-year-old. Even a mature 10-year-old, she was fraying. And I was worried, but I knew that I had, I had to express to her that I could only do things for her in court. So that, she wanted me to do things immediately. Like she wanted me to talk to people and make things happen at the hospital. I was honest with her. Even though she was 10, I treated her like my adult clients. I was honest with her face to face and explained to her, I'm only going to be able to help her when I go back to court and see the judge.
Now, in the second visit, were you required still to have the door open during your consultation with your client?
Oh, yes.
And
yeah, there was a real reluctance, like a mistrust of me. These people didn't know me.
did they
I
know
was
you
just
were
there to represent my client.
Well, did they know you were her attorney?
Oh yeah. Oh no. I made it very clear. I will tell you that I went there to make nice to these people, and to put it that way, I didn't go in there with any kind of bluster. I didn't try to intimidate and throw my weight around. I used the exact opposite tact. I tried to be as nice as I could and let them know that I'm just there to help my client and not cause anybody any trouble. I was obviously aware that there was quite a bit of, acrimony going on between the family and the hospital. And I thought it best to try to play peacemaker in my ability to just help my client and have access to her.
Now, in addition to Ms. Beatty, how would you describe your reception by the others that you dealt with in the hospital once they knew that you were Maya's attorney? Warm, cold, indifferent? What?
I felt like there was a certain, like an amount of suspicion. I mean, I think that, and I didn't know why, obviously, because I was not dealing with mom and dad's interactions with the hospital, but I certainly had the sense that those were not going well. And I felt that, I was being treated as though I was part and parcel of whatever was going on behind the scenes. I wasn't, but that's how I was being treated.
Now, did they put forth a reason why it was so necessary for them to stand outside the door with the door open during your consultation with your client? They talk about the child being unsafe or some disease or something. I don't know.
Hold on a second, Mr. Zimmerman.
Objection to, there's no evidence that somebody was standing outside the door, just that the door was open.
He did.
Sorry.
Let's just go to this factual basis. I'm going to sustain the objection. You can re-ask your question.
On this opportunity to see your client, you've testified the door was open. Tell the jury, if you did believe, how and why you believe that somebody was outside that door, either listening or just standing.
Wait. You want to know how I knew that someone was out there?
Yes.
It was made clear to me that someone was going to be out there. As though I was going to do something, as though I was going to do something wrong in the room. I don't mean physically harm my client, but that I was going to violate some kind of. I don't know what it was. Maybe like that I was going to express something about her treatment or something like that. But obviously, I had no intention of doing anything like that.
So from what the hospital was telling you, they wanted to listen into your conversations to see if you were following their rules?
Objection, leading.
They
Sustained.
What, if anything, were your conclusions about what they were trying to do?
It was clear to me that they were acting under what they thought to be some type of authority. Now, whether it was something they were getting from the hospital administration or whether it was their interpretation of a court order, they were acting as though they were, how could I put it? Well, I mean, I don't know exactly.
It's all right.
You know what I mean? I mean, to be quite frank, I mean, I only can say that they didn't trust me. You know what I mean? And that they felt it was their duty to monitor me.
Even
I
as
can't say where they perceive their duty came from. That I'd be speculating on.
even knowing that you were her attorney, they did this?
Yeah, everyone knew I was her attorney. That I made crystal clear.
So did they ever express any incident or accident, some reason why they felt, outside of what we were talking about with just being enforcers, or however you put it, but did they reference any specific event or accident or thing that necessitated this? Did they discuss with you anything about Maya falling?
No, I mean, yes, that was specifically discussed. There was a time where Maya, I think she was reaching for a phone, and there was a concern that she'd fallen, and they were expressing that, that there could be some type of a safety issue. But I mean, again, I was just talking to her in her room. I mean, that was honestly kind of ridiculous.
And so,
listen, I'm not the least pushy person in the world. I mean, I expressed to them, but I again, in the nicest way possible. I didn't want to I needed to talk to my client. And I was really concerned that if I crossed over some kind of line, they were going to remove me. So I was being extraordinarily cordial to them, and they were being extremely suspicious and limiting to me.
Now, did they discuss, was there a difference between what Maya told you to happen in terms of her falling as being out of a wheelchair, and then what the hospital was telling you of where and how she fell?
I'm sorry,
did the hospital?
That does sound familiar, but I can't remember the details of that. But I do remember that.
Let me
that was a bit of an issue. I mean,
let me see if I can help you with this. In your conversations
Sure.
with Maya, in terms of any type of fall, where was Maya when she said she fell? What did she fall out of? Was it the wheelchair?
I honestly can't remember, but I don't know. I remember there was a discussion about, and I thought it was from Maya, about the bed had some kind of like rails on the side, and I think I remember her expressing to me that she didn't feel there was a fall risk. I can't remember what the hospital said about that, but I that part I do remember.
All right, and so you said you had conversations with Maya by telephone when you could?
Yes.
And was she attempting to call you by phone, to the best of your knowledge?
I would no. I called her. I had been made aware that Maya wanted to talk to me, and then I would call her.
All right. And so then was there ever a time when you were trying to make just a call to your client and Ms. Beatty interrupted about the need for approval?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, it was getting a little contentious. And again, I was trying not to play bully with her because I had a feeling that wasn't going to work. But it was pretty consistent. I mean, I had to sort of navigate my way around her, is the best way I can put it, to gain access to my client. There was clearly an effort to put up hurdles and hoops for me to have to jump over and jump through. I didn't really understand why. I could tell there was an obvious agenda there, but I just had to be determined to get to talk to and see my client. Well, I was trying to work around the situation.
Sure. So having these concerns, did you ever notify anyone, write any notes to say that Ms. Beatty was a problem here, or the hospital staff was a problem here in you communicating with your client?
I believe I emailed regarding that issue. Ultimately, I received a letter from somebody associated with Johns Hopkins advising me not to have any contact with their staff.
Let me get this straight.
Your Honor, may we just really briefly approach on this?
Yes.
One moment.
Mr. Zimmerman, are you able to hear me?
I am.
Okay. Mr. Anderson, you may continue with your questioning.
After that communication, did things change in any way to the best of your perception? Or I guess the question would be, did you see Maya after that?
No, not at the hospital.
And were the phone calls, for lack of a better term, the ability to contact your client improved, or were they still problematic?
They were problematic, and also our emphasis shifted from trying to get Maya into the courtroom. I remember there was a shift to try to get her into court.
And without naming names or specifics, was that a battle?
Oh,
Honor,
yes.
I'm going to object and ask to approach on this.
Please come forward. Hold on a second, Mr. Zimmerman. Mr. Zimmerman, are you able to hear us again?
I am.
Okay, I'm going to sustain the objection.
So now, you recall that Beata Kowalski took her own life.
Yes, I was made aware of that.
Were you involved at all in the circumstances of notifying Maya?
No.
And so, by the end of the time you were in contact with her, after having spoken to her, as you testified on the phone several times, seeing her a few times, can you tell the jury your view of any changes in your client from the first time that you saw her to the last time that you saw or communicated with her?
Well, like I said earlier, it went from what I would call extreme frustration to desperation. That's the best way I could describe it. She wanted she felt like she was a prisoner. I will say that from her perspective, her focus toward me, and she was pretty clever about this, shifted from I want to see my parents to I want to see the judge. So that became sort of the focus of my relationship with her. She expressed to me, I want to see the judge. I want to go to court. There's things I need to tell the judge. So that sort of became the new battle.
And so was she, in terms of her overall physical presentation from the first time to the last time, did it appear to you that she was degrading, that she was not getting better?
She was very consistent. Yeah, I'm not a doctor, obviously, but I did always ask her, how are you doing? How's the pain? And she was extremely consistent that it was always bad. So as long as she was in the hospital, she expressed that physically she always felt terrible. I could tell emotionally that she was doing worse and worse. But the physical part that she expressed to me was consistent, just that she felt terrible. Her pain is a 10.
But I take it you weren't around. Were you around for any of the physical therapies or other movements of her that might have told you more about her physical condition?
Not at all. The only sense I had of her physical condition is what she told me.
From what you saw over the time that you were involved with the hospital, did it appear to you that beyond simply taking care of this little girl, the young girl, that there was an agenda behind the scenes in terms of their overall approach to her?
To the extreme.
And if you could elaborate just briefly.
The hospital personnel I dealt with and everyone related to the hospital was hyper focused on keeping Maya from her family.
No further questions.
Ms. Croels.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning or afternoon or whatever time it is there, Mr. Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. I'm 7 hours ahead of you.
Okay. All right. So I want to make sure that we have timeframes clear. If there is a note in the hospital chart that indicates that on December 6, 2016, that was the first time that you were at the hospital to see your client, does that comport with your recollection of when you became her attorney?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So by the time you became Maya's attorney, the dependency order that was already, and the yes, the dependency order had already been entered, correct? The shelter order.
Yes, the shelter order had already been entered.
All right. And that was entered back in this October 14th, but was effective as of October 13th, 2016, correct?
I mean, I know the orders. I read them, but I'll take your word for it on the dates.
It's been a while.
But that sounds right.
I understand. So by the time you see Maya, she had already been there over a month, correct? In the hospital?
Yes.
Well
correct.
Over a month. Right.
Well over.
All right. And of course, as a 10-year-old, very natural for her to be upset, worried, distraught over not being able to be with her family, correct?
Absolutely.
And the reason that she wasn't with her family was because the court had entered the shelter order in October of 2016, correct?
That would be the technical legal reason, correct?
Well, the order is what was preventing Maya from seeing her family, correct? As far as her mother is concerned.
Well, as you know, when courts enter orders, they do it based on information provided to them. And
Mr. Zimmerman, did the order direct that Maya was not to have any type of physical contact with her mother?
Objection, which order?
All of the orders.
Three of them, no.
Overruled. You can answer that one, Mr. Zimmerman.
To my knowledge, that's correct.
Thank you. All right. Now, it's also not uncommon, is it, Mr. Zimmerman, whether it's a divorce or this type of action, for a child to find somebody particular to blame, correct? To put the face on it of her misery or her distress.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't handle divorce cases.
All right. Well, even in shelter cases, from Maya's perception, she was blaming the hospital from separating her from her family. Is that fair?
Yes.
All right. And with respect to the shelter, that's the people she was dealing with on a day-to-day basis, were the people in the hospital, correct?
Correct. She was blaming the people who she was dealing with directly. Correct.
Correct. And you understand that the hospital was bound to follow the orders from the dependency court, correct?
Well,
Are they required to follow the orders?
Objection vague as to time.
sure. Of course.
Okay, hold on a second, Mr. Zimmerman. Objection sustained.
Okay. With respect to the shelter orders that were in place and the visitation orders that were in place with respect to Maya and her parents, the hospital was required to follow them, correct?
Same objection.
The hospital was.
Same objection.
Overruled. Mr. Zimmerman, you can answer that question.
Could they violate the orders, Mr. Zimmerman?
They were interpreting the orders, so they were complying with the orders based on their interpretation of the orders.
One second, Aaron.
Okay.
Mr. Zimmerman, when you would have your conversations with Maya, whether in person or on the phone, by the way, you were allowed to have those conversations. I understand you indicated some difficulties, but you were allowed to have the conversations with Maya, correct?
Yes, ultimately we spoke and visited with each other.
Right. Did you advise her of what was going on with the court proceedings and what was happening at the court hearings?
I did.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Anderson.
May it please the court. There were several orders concerning the different stages or types of visitation and rules. Were there?
Yes.
Were those orders such that there was a great deal of interpretation that could be made out of them as to what rules and how to enforce them?
Yes. I mean, obviously the orders could be observed with a certain amount of fervor or not. In this particular case, there was a particular level of fervor to which these orders were enforced.
During this period of time, did you have the opportunity or did you make them aware that Maya had rights under the hospital's own statement of patients' rights?
Right. Yes, that there's a patient's bill of rights, and my client had rights and I expressed that, and they expressed to me that they were following what they thought or what they interpreted to be the orders given by the court.
Was there tension there between the two in your view? That is, the patient's statement of rights